There we go. Now I'm recording. So I will not be taking roll. You guys know what you need to do to get through a class. I definitely would love everybody to attend the lectures, or so-called attend them. I will be recording them. For this week, I'm going to be doing the lectures at 2 p.m. just because I think that's the time that the class was. If you can't make it for some reason, and I expect that's true with some of you guys, whether it's family, whether it's other types of things, you can't make it, I will be emailing you the YouTube link to all my lectures. So each time. Obviously, the PowerPoints are posted, at least for the first 3 lectures, so you can go on to the Canvas, the Blackboard page, and see the lectures there. But as far as the actual lecture, the audio and everything, I will be sending those to you. So this week, I will be lecturing kind of live at 2 p.m. After this week, that may change. I want to keep it at 2 because some of you guys may have other classes as well that I don't want to change the time. So that's kind of the way it's going to be right now. I'd love to get to know everybody, but with so many people, it would be very hard. All right, there's a question out there. Since there is no study guide, will you have any office hours as it is to be announced on the syllabus? Great question. And in fact, there will be a study guide. I put that in there a while back because I just wasn't sure if I was going to do it, but I am going to be putting together a study guide. So there will be a study guide and will be posted on Blackboard. But I also will be having office hours. I haven't set those up yet, but I will definitely let you guys know. And of course, office hours is going to basically be something like this. I'll set aside a time and I'll be here just like this. You guys can, if you have any questions, you can ask me. So yes, so there will be office hours. There will be a study guide. I just don't know exactly, don't have the details on that yet. I hope, first of all, I hope everybody is healthy and safe. It's been quite an ordeal with everybody. And hopefully you guys are making it through relatively unscathed, you and your families. I know one of my students from Mesa, she was hospitalized in the middle of the semester. They thought she might have COVID just based on her symptoms, but it ended up not being that. So hopefully we're sort of trending back to some sense of normalcy, but in the meantime, we'll do this. As far as the fall, just out of curiosity, I know I'm not going to be at State. Are you guys going to do distance learning as well in the fall, or they're talking about having some classes on campus?
Some classes like labs are going to be on campus.
Sure. Yeah, and we're kind of going through the same thing at Mesa where, so I teach anatomy, right? And you can imagine, some of you guys have taken, how the heck do you teach anatomy online? Anatomy lab. I mean, you can't. I mean, we've done it this semester. I posted pictures of models. We've had some videos, done like a virtual dissection, but you can't really do it. So in fact, in the fall, we are still doing labs online, which I'm not particularly thrilled with. It's what we're gonna do. And hopefully by fall, by spring, it'll be much better. So anyway, okay, so that's basically it as far as now. Let's see, a few more questions. Labs on campus, will there be office hours? Yeah, so that's pretty much it. All right, so let me just go through a little bit about the class. I'm not gonna go through the entire course information. Hopefully you guys have already been on Blackboard, obviously, because you're here and you saw the information I sent about access to Zoom. So I've got the course information, course requirements, as far as the lecture schedule. So let me just go over the lecture schedule just a bit here. I thought I had it.
You learning today too?
Okay, actually, I am going to go over one thing on the course information, and this is all kind of new to me as well. And I'm not sure if you guys did it this semester, but they have this immediate access, which I'm sure you guys know about. So you guys will get, digital access to the textbook, and you can kind of read through this. The textbook we're using for the class, of course, is the animal physiology text, but it is available digitally. And I think if you have any other questions, you can contact the Aztec shops. That's pretty much all I know at this point. Has anybody had any difficulties as far as getting onto Blackboard or accessing anything? Okay, I guess not. No. Cool. All right. Okay, so let me go over the lecture schedule. And let me see, where did I put it? Let's see, I just had it out here. Oh, there it is. Okay, hold on a second. Let me just close that out for a second. Close current tab. Sorry about that. That and
Se burlan de mí porque estoy gorda. Adivina qué, soy tu hada madrina. Pídeme un deseo.
okay, somebody has got their audio on, and sounds like someone's got like a kid or something like that. So if you could mute the audio, that would be really helpful. I love kids, but okay, so stop share, no. Okay, and why is that not showing up here? Okay, oh wait. Okay, I'm just finagling here with a couple things. Hold on a second. And lecture schedule. Oh, there you go. Okay, so I assume you guys can see that. If you can't, let me know. So today we're going to go through an introduction of physiology. Some of it will be very familiar to you guys, and it'll be a good review. Some of you guys might be hearing this stuff for the first time. 27th, which is tomorrow, and 28th, which is Thursday, we'll go over the nervous system and sensory systems. I'm going to be doing that over 2 lectures, and I've got both of those posted. I do have chapter assignments, and definitely I encourage you to look through the chapters, but just to let you know, I do base my exams on the lecture material. So there may be some material that's covered in the chapters, but I won't be covering that in lecture, so you won't need to know. Next week, so classes are Monday through Thursday. So so this is Thursday, last one. Next week, we'll start covering muscle, which I have not posted the lectures for yet. And then we'll have our first exam, which will be June 4th. So that'll be the end of next week. I will be posting a study guide, which will be part of the exam review on the 3rd. Okay. The exams are going to be mostly multiple choice, maybe a couple essays, some true false. I will be kind of updating that as we go along. But each exam will be worth 100 points. We have 3 exams this semester. The first one is June 4th, which will cover intro, nervous and sensory and muscle. Second exam will be covering cardio and respiratory, and that'll be on the 17th. And the third, third will be on renal, endocrine, digestion, possibly thermoregulation. I know it sounds like a lot, but we'll try to get through all that. And that last exam will be July 2nd. I know it shows that the class ends, I think, the following week or so, but we're going to finish up on July 2nd. So in case you're wondering. All right. Any questions? All right. Okay. Okay, stop share, new share. Okay, so let's go ahead and start off talking about physiology, really just kind of an intro to physiology. Let me kind of go back to the beginning here. All right. Okay, so information about me. That's actually something I should mention to you, how to get a hold of me. So best way is through email. This is my email address through Mesa College. Some of you have also emailed me through SDSU, which I do get those emails. So if that kind of mindset is already in your head, SDSU sending me to that, that's fine, I'll get it. So either sdccd.edu or kcrown@sdsu.edu. Either of those will be fine. One last thing before we get started. I know a couple of you have spoken to me about accommodations, extra time on exams, as well as video, as far as closed caption. Yes, I've worked it out with the campus that once the lectures are done, I'm gonna submit a video. Well, it'll be on YouTube, but I'm also gonna submit a video to the virtual, I'm not sure what the name of the office is at SDSU, where they will do some closed captioning work and they will make it available to you. So hopefully that'll work. If you have any issues, then feel free to ask me. Either I know, or if I don't know, I'll try to direct you into the right person. Okay. So first of all, what is physiology? So before we actually get into animal physiology, let's just talk about physiology in general. And essentially what it is, it's a study of how our body, or how an animal's body functions. And of course, that's pretty vague, that's pretty wide open. You know, like how does our digestive system work? How does our nervous system work? Right, and that's kind of the general aspects. A lot involved there, a lot of mechanisms. The other thing, which I think is very important as well and really applies to animal physiology, is how organisms such as us are able to accomplish tasks necessary for adaptation and survival. And I know task sounds like it's a job, but basically the process of digestion is a job. The process of eliminating waste is a job. The process of regulating blood sugar is a job. And our body has to do all these different things in order for us to survive, depending on what our environment is. We're going to take a look at animals that live in different places, whether it's on land, and if it's on land, is it near the coast or is it in the desert? In the water, is it salt water or fresh water? Things like that. So how we are able to accomplish tasks and adapt is really critical, because if we don't adapt, this can lead to pathophysiology, or essentially an altered function that leads to disease. Now, what that really means, a good example of that is someone who is diabetic. Right? Normally, our bodies do a good job at regulating blood sugar, right? We eat a meal, we break down food, nutrients get to our intestine, we absorb it into the blood, nutrients go sky high, right? And then we typically deliver those nutrients to different tissues. But in people who have diabetes, the ability to deliver the nutrients to tissue is failing. A couple of different reasons, which we'll get to later. This is an altered function. That's a failure to adapt. So that's a good example of pathophysiology. There's a lot of different ones too. Obviously, you know, people who have heart disease or high blood pressure. right? There's different things that are normally kept in check, but something goes wrong. Sometimes medically it can be taken care of and sometimes not. All right. So I want to go over a little bit of history. I'm not going to inundate you with, multitude of different things. Let me just go back for one quick second here. I just want to check, make sure. Okay. I always like to make sure I am recording. I'm sure you would appreciate that too. All right. So a couple key things about history of physiology. So there's a lot that goes back centuries ago and beyond, but some of the more current, you can think of the 1800s as current, certain experiments that were done that gave us some understanding of function. One person who did this was a scientist named Arnold Berthold in the 1800s. Unfortunately, he didn't realize the significance of his work, and it wasn't until someone found his documents later on that they actually published it. But he was studying chickens. And what he did is he was curious in what the function of testes were. He saw this organ. It's like, what is this doing in males? So what he did is he took it out. And this was common with a lot of different organs in the body that were done over the millennia. How do you figure out what an organ does? You remove it. Now, unfortunately, removing an organ can cause death, but sometimes it just disrupts a certain process. So when he removed the testes, what did he see? Well, normally a immature male chicken, which is called a cockerel, grows up into looking like a rooster. When he removed the testes, otherwise known as castrating, it grew up looking like this. Basically, it looked like a hen. It didn't have a comb, up here, or a wattle, or the typical tail feathers, or even the spike that a lot of males do. Then what he did is he figured, okay, well, just to confirm, let me implant the testes back in, because the testes in chickens are internal. And what happened was the immature chicken grew up into a normal looking one. So his conclusion, which was absolutely correct, was that there must be something, because he was observing behavior as well as structure, there must be something produced by these testes that is somehow getting into the blood and going to these other parts and affecting their growth. So he didn't know what this chemical in the blood was, but what do you think it was? Any thoughts? It would be testosterone. Of course, they didn't know anything about hormones back then. All right. So that was a very important discovery. Let me find it. Okay. All right. Now and I don't normally like to put a lot of text on my slides, but sometimes it requires it. Another scientist back in the 1800s, Claude Bernard, he's considered the father of modern physiology. Other people have done some great things, but he had a really good concept of how to kind of trying to understand how the body works. He was French, so they had to translate what he said. And one of the things that he said, he described what they called the milieu intérieur, or the internal environment of an organism, and how important it is to keep that constant. So what he said was, the living body, though it has a need of the surrounding environment, is nevertheless relatively independent of it. This independence, which the organism has of its external environment, derives from the fact that in the living being, the tissues are in fact withdrawn from direct external influences and are protected by a veritable internal environment, which is constituted in particular by the fluids circulating in the body. Those fluids being things like blood and other interstitial fluids. So he was trying to say is like, well, here we're exposed to a lot of things going on around us, right? But yet our body still has to maintain a relatively constant function. So this is why he was talking about this internal environment has to somehow remain constant. Now, obviously, knowing biology, things aren't exactly perfect. I mean, but our bodies change, right? Our temperatures go up, our temperature goes down. right? Our stress level goes up. Our stress level goes down. We get dehydrated, right? Then we have too much water, right? Things like that, they change. So how do we maintain our constant internal environment? Well, first, let's talk a little bit about fluids when you mentioned the internal environment. So this internal environment that Bernard spoke about refers to the fluid surrounding cells, sometimes called extracellular fluid. And on average, not to be gender biased, but a 70-kilogram male has roughly a total body water content of about 42 liters, which is about 60% of our body weight. Of that 42 liters that's in the body, it's divided up into different compartments. About 28 of those liters are found within cells, intracellular fluid. About 14 liters, right, is found in what we call the extracellular fluid, which would be things like the plasma, which is about 3 liters, and then what we call the interstitial fluid. So this would be fluid surrounding cells, but also not in the blood either. That's most of it. So we've got a lot of fluid. This is all part of this internal environment that has different levels of water, salts, and things like that. Okay? So the ICF is the intracellular fluid. And if you take a look, that's really what's indicated in blue. So this is meant to be the blood. These are like blood cells with fluid inside them. This is fluid within organs of the body, within cells. Then we have the extracellular fluid. And it's the extracellular fluid that is really the internal environment. Now it sounds strange because here's intracellular fluid, but it's really the environment of the plasma, which is the blue, and the environment of the fluid that's in between the blood and the tissues, that's interstitial fluid. That's the internal environment. And how we regulate that, how we maintain sodium levels, water levels, sugar levels, volume levels is critical to our survival. The way we do that is known as homeostasis. Homeostasis, I'm sure many of you have heard this ad nauseum over and over. This is an important theme in physiology. Homeostasis was a term that was coined by a Harvard physiologist called Walter Cannon to describe our ability to regulate the internal environment. Now, regulating the internal environment, you often think, okay, we're going to keep things constant. But the reality is we're not keeping things constant. We're keeping things within a range. For example, say if you take a look at this graph, if you were to measure your body temperature any time of day, even though on average it's 98.6, I would guarantee with you that at any time of the day, the temperature is going to be different. One time of day, it might be 99.5. Then it might be 97.8. It's going to fluctuate throughout the day, but it's revolving around this, what we call this set point. Okay. Now, the way we do this, and this is another term you're going to become familiar with, is known as negative feedback. We're going to talk about negative feedback loops, which is a mechanism in which our body responds to changes by opposing that change, right? If your blood pressure goes up, fortunately, we have mechanisms that usually work that bring it back down. Like I said, usually work. In people who have hypertension, they obviously have to have sometimes medication. Okay. So homeostasis is the ability to maintain a relatively constant internal environment. So what are some of the different parameters we have to look at in keeping kind of balanced? Well, body temperature for one. Blood volume. We have to have a way of ensuring our blood volume doesn't get too high or too low. And often this is dictated by craving water or the amount that we urinate, things like that. pH. The acidity of our body is very critical because enzymes have a certain optimum pH that they function. And if that pH is disrupted, it's going to affect the function of those enzymes, which can affect a whole slew of different whether it's digestive mechanisms or other things. Composition, this is a big one. Think of like the urinary system or excretory system, things like that. How we regulate our solute level, sodium, potassium, water. I can go on, right? Those are just some examples. And it requires kind of typically not just one organ, but several working together. For example, one of the things that we'll learn later is maintaining pH involves the collective involvement of both our respiratory system and our urinary system. And of course, disruption of this can lead to disease and possibly death if it's not made, if it falls out of favor. This is a neat little diagram kind of showing the process that here we have us in homeostasis. We have external changes that are going on that will lead to an internal change. For example, say we're, let me think. Well, I'll just use the blood sugar thing, okay? We bring in food, and this leads to an increase in blood sugar levels. That would be an internal change, right? That's a loss of homeostasis. Well, we need to respond to that, and our organism normally compensates by producing something like insulin. If that compensation works, this leads to success, wellness. If that compensation fails, such as diabetes, that can lead to illness, or in a worst case scenario, death. And again, I'm open at any time to any questions. I know it's kind of a difficult venue to do it, but again, some of you may ask me questions on the chat thing, and after we're done with class, I may go back to them and answer them for you, or hopefully before that. All right. So some terms to mention to you in reference to homeostasis. I'm going to be introducing some terms. One is the set point. This is the expected value of a certain variable. Body temperature, 37 degrees Celsius or 98.6. Blood sugar, and this would be kind of like fasting blood sugar. Actually, I would even drop that level. Most doctors like to have it below that, like around 70 or 80, but just for now, let's just say it's at 100. And our blood pH should be about 7.4. And the way our system works, if these values stray from the set point, then we need to respond. Okay? This is a good example of, now we're wondering where speed comes from. We're looking at a car. Actually, I should have put this one first. Let's take a look at an example of a car, okay? So say you're driving at 60 miles an hour. We'll just call that a set point, right? Then you're going up the hill, right? Well, your speed drops. But in response to that, you want to keep that 60 miles an hour, right? So you drop, but then you push the accelerator, the speed increases, and now you're back to the set point. So we responded to this little error. This is the error, right? So we're going to 60 miles an hour, we dropped down, but then we responded to get it back to 60. This is true with any sort of regulation. When we're talking about an air conditioner, you have a set point, the thermostats, right? That gets, you set whatever that set point is. If it reaches that, whatever the temperature is, if you're looking at the air conditioner will go on, or the heater will go on. It just depends. Okay? So besides the set point, I want to mention a couple other important components of homeostasis. Now, some of these are terms you may have heard of. I'm going to refer to what we call receptors, integrating cells, integrating centers, and effectors. Now, you may have heard of receptors from other classes like cell membrane receptors, signaling transduction, and all that. Well, in this case, we're looking at receptors as proteins that detect a change. Integrating centers that analyze that change and send a signal to a target tissue. All right, so let's take a look at some examples. So receptors are sensors that detect stimuli. For example, we have a built-in thermostat that if it strays from 98.6, right, if it gets too low, what do we do when the temperature gets too low? What's our normal body response to a decrease in temperature?
Shivering.
Okay, we shiver, right? If it gets too high, we sweat. Chemoreceptors. We have these molecules on the surface of tissues that sense chemical changes. Well, things like responding to levels of carbon dioxide, responding to pH. We have baroreceptors. They respond to pressure changes. And depending on what's going on in the blood, or even in the kidney, where we have these chemoreceptors as well, they sense, they're kind of like they report. They sense that something's different. They report it to the integrating center. And some integrating centers are found in the brain. Some, they're more local. But nonetheless, they kind of take this information from the receptors, process it, and then send out a signal to the effector. So say, for example, say thermoreceptors, right? Say, for example, we're too hot, right? Thermoreceptors send a signal to the brain, which leads to our glands, our sweat glands becoming active. If our temperature gets too low, right, signal goes to our skeletal muscles and we start to shiver, or striated muscles, right? Other things as well. Smooth muscles, for example, respiratory tract. Say if the pressure is off or something like that, the respiratory pressure. So these are the different components, all right? Now, I mentioned the term negative feedback. So this is kind of one and the same with how homeostasis works. If a variable decreases, and we'll call the variable temperature, the system responds to make it increase, or vice versa, right? If the variable decreases, we increase. If the variable increases, we decrease. So there's this, again, this dynamic equilibrium. It's meant to self-correct. All right. So negative feedback is ubiquitous throughout our bodies, right? With all these different regulatory mechanisms. One example I want to use is blood sugar. Okay, and let's see how that fits in. So say, for example, we have a set point of normal blood glucose. According to that last slide, I think I mentioned, what, 100, right? Say, for example, we just ate a meal, even if it's not like, you know, sugary, like a Danish muffin or something like that. Any food you eat, you're going to see an increase in sugar, obviously amino acids, fats, all sorts of nutrients. When blood sugar goes up, this signals the pancreas, specifically the beta cells, right? So we have, and I guess what it doesn't show here is we actually have these chemosensors, because I spoke about chemoreceptors. In this case, these would be chemoreceptors that respond to glucose in the pancreas. So glucose goes up, these signals respond. It goes specifically into the pancreas, which is also the integrating center. So this is a local integrating center, no brain involved. And the integrating center responds by increasing the production of insulin. What does insulin do? Insulin then goes to all the different target organs, whether it's muscle or liver or fat cells, and it allows glucose to be pulled into those tissues. So it takes the sugar that's been in the blood, delivers it to the organs where they're pulled in. Now, what happens if blood sugar gets too low? There's a negative feedback that will trigger a response that will raise blood sugar. So again, it's negative feedback counters the stimulus. And as you might expect, we also have a response if blood sugar level gets too low. Another hormone known as glucagon. But we'll talk about that later. All right. So actually, let me show you a video. It's like a 3-minute video of really regulating blood sugar. It's kind of a neat little animation. So hopefully you guys enjoy this. Hopefully the sound is up. It looks like it is.
The sugar you devour enters your digestive system and is broken down to simple sugars like glucose. Glucose enters the bloodstream, causing an increase in blood glucose levels. But various mechanisms bring blood glucose back down to its normal level, the set point. This is an example of homeostasis, the body's tendency to maintain relatively constant internal conditions. Hormones produced by the pancreas regulate blood glucose levels. Let's zoom in. When blood glucose levels are high, glucose molecules leave the blood and enter beta cells in the pancreas. The beta cells respond by releasing the hormone insulin. Insulin enters the bloodstream and is transported to cells all over the body. Let's see what happens in the liver. Insulin binds to receptors on liver cells. This causes the cells to take in more glucose. Inside the liver cells, glucose is converted to glycogen, a storage molecule. Blood glucose levels decrease as glucose is taken up by liver cells and other body cells. As a result, less and less insulin is released by the pancreas, and blood glucose levels stabilize at their set point. This is an example of how negative feedback maintains homeostasis. What happens if you skip lunch and your blood glucose levels are low? Let's zoom into the pancreas again. When blood glucose levels are low, alpha cells in the pancreas release the hormone glucagon. Glucagon enters the bloodstream and acts on target cells in the liver. Glucagon binds to receptors on the liver cells, signaling the liver cells to break glycogen down to glucose. Glucose is released. And blood glucose levels increase. As a result, less glucagon is released by the pancreas, and blood glucose levels stabilize at their set point. In this way, two hormones with opposing effects allow the body to maintain homeostasis of blood glucose levels. In diabetes, the body is unable to maintain homeostasis of blood glucose levels. In type 1 diabetes, the beta cells of the pancreas are destroyed by the immune system, and so no insulin is produced. In type 2 diabetes, the pancreas produces insulin, but target cells do not take up glucose. In both types of diabetes, when blood glucose levels rise, cells do not take up the additional glucose, and so blood glucose remains high. This example shows the importance of homeostasis in everyone's life.
Okay. Okay. One second here. All right, so hopefully you guys could hear that, enjoyed that video. They talked a little bit about diabetes. I'm gonna talk more about it later in the semester. We talk about the endocrine system. All you need to know about the diabetes right now is the fact that whatever type of diabetes it is, the net result is a disruption of homeostasis that leads to an increase in blood sugar. All right, so other ways of maintaining homeostasis, other parameters, I should say, are regulation of pH. And yes, pH should be around 7.4, but it's considered acceptable. between 7.35 and 7.45. This is typically, now how do we keep it at this level? They're maintained by buffers. And I know from chemistry, you guys have learned a lot about buffers. These are molecules that resist pH change, and so they keep things stable. Two buffers we have are carbonate buffer, which is found in the blood, and phosphate buffers, which are found in circulation. I mean, in the tissues, I'm sorry. Inside our cells, I should say. We have phosphate inside our cells. Carbonate buffer is the main buffering system in the blood. This is kind of a good example. So carbon dioxide is a waste molecule, as you know, but in the presence of water, an enzyme becomes carbonic acid. Obviously, with the H hydrogen ion, that's going to lower pH, but a buffer will actually cause this reaction to shift the other way. So it's all about maintaining pH. Now, why is regulation of pH so important? Like I mentioned, it's important because enzymes typically have an optimal pH they function best at. For example, stomach enzymes like pepsin function best at a pH of about 2, which it fits well with the stomach, which has a low pH, whereas amylase, which is a starch digesting enzyme of the mouth, functions best at a pH of 7. Now, the pH of 2, you might wonder about that. Well, pH of 2 is not in the blood. So individual tissues may have their own different pH, but with blood pH, it should be in this range. And if the blood pH is disrupted, we can have one of two conditions: acidosis, where the pH is less than 7.35. And this can be caused by these 3 conditions. Chronic diarrhea. I don't just mean like the once in a while bad meal diarrhea, but very serious pathological diarrhea, diabetes, hypoventilation, alkalosis or a high pH can be due to, again, excessive vomiting, as well as hyperventilation. So both of these are all causes that can lead to this. Not the only causes, but certainly are some. So regulation of pH is important, like I mentioned, for maintaining our normal metabolic function, our normal enzymes. All right, so I've already spoken about negative feedback, right? Well, if there's a negative feedback, you would think there might be a positive feedback. And we hear about positive feedback when you're in a discussion with somebody. It's like, or if you do something, you'd like some positive feedback, right? Well, in that respect, that's obviously different. In this case, positive feedback physiologically involves the response to a stimulus that reinforces the stimulus. So this is certainly destabilizing, not homeostatic, right? So in this particular case, you have a stress. Now, I put stress in there. I don't necessarily mean fight or flight. A stress can be some outside thing that's causing a disruption. For example, eating a meal, blood sugar levels going up, that's a stress, right? But with homeostasis, we bring the blood sugars down, right? Same thing with pH, with water levels, typically in response to this outside influence on our internal environment, we respond to bring it down. In this case, we have an outside influence that's disrupting homeostasis, and the positive feedback response ends up furthering the loss of homeostasis. So you would imagine it's like, well, that's not going to work very well for a lot of these processes. It would be like, if your body temperature went up and then it kept going up, right? Your sodium levels in your blood went up and they kept going up. That's not homeostasis. But there are needs for certain processes that require positive feedback in the short term. Okay, for example, blood clotting. Now, I know this looks like homeostasis. It's not a typo. Hemostasis, which is basically the process of wound repair. Typically, there's a positive feedback in response to the wound. We produce clotting factors. which lead to the production of more clotting factors and more platelets, continued until the wound is repaired, right? It's a self kind of regenerating mechanism. Another positive feedback loop is the reproductive system with women, for example. Now, we'll get into this later with the endocrine system, but there's a couple different glands involved. There's one gland called the pituitary gland that produces a hormone called LH. And LH stimulates the ovaries to make estrogen. Now, without getting into all the details, normally what happens, there's a positive feedback that leads estrogen to stimulate more LH, more estrogen, more LH, more estrogen until ovulation occurs. So the ovulatory cycle in females is dependent upon positive feedback. If it was a negative feedback, the eggs wouldn't ovulate. Increased estrogen production would inhibit LH. We want it to build and build and build till eventually the egg ovulates. Other aspects of positive feedback would be the onset of labor or childbirth or prior to childbirth. This is one diagram that shows it, some details, but let me go to this one. Oh, actually, that's right. Never mind. What does the positive feedback involve? First of all, again, it's a response to a stimulus that helps to reinforce it. So the baby's in the uterus, the baby drops, the expression it drops in the uterus puts pressure on the cervix, which stretches. The cervix stretches, this triggers the release of a hormone in the pituitary called oxytocin. You may have heard of Pitocin, which is the synthetic version of that, which is sometimes given to patients that are late term, if they're not contracting it. This oxytocin triggers contractions of the uterus. As the uterus contracts, it pushes the baby against the cervix, causing more stretch, more oxytocin, more contraction, over and over until the baby is delivered, and that stops this cycle. So here we've looked at 3 positive feedbacks. Though they're not homeostatic, they're necessary. They're essential for these sort of like short-term things, right? Wound repair, ovulation, baby delivery. Well, hopefully labor is short. I know in some people it's long. All right. So that's what I wanted to go through with you in terms of kind of a general background with physiology. Now I want to at least get into a little bit to kind of bring us up to speed, kind of transitioning into what we're going to start covering tomorrow, and that's animal physiology. Now, it's not any different in terms of maintaining homeostasis, but how different animals do it is going to be, there's going to be a lot of comparing and contrasting. So first of all, if we take a look at, one of the things we're going to look at is we'll be looking at the respiratory systems of animals. And all animals have to have some way of adapting to their environment by utilizing specialized structures to maintain homeostasis. For example, for respiratory systems, I'm specifically talking about internal respiratory systems. One of the things we'll learn about, there are external systems, especially in animals that live in the water, such as fish, but animals that live on land typically have internal systems. We obviously have these lungs. Insects have what are called the tracheal system. And snails have what's also referred to as a lung, but it's more of a mantle cavity. So internal structures that help to maintain homeostasis. And the reason for that is because we're terrestrial animals, having our lungs outside our body wouldn't work. They would dry up, right? And they would not function. They have to be internal. What about temperatures, right? Animals have to adapt to their environmental temperature by utilizing specialized mechanisms to conserve water and maintain temperature, right? For example, the way we do it with sweating or shivering or whatever, drinking water, right, is different than how camels do it, right? Even within land environment, there's differences. And of course, conserving water is also different in different animals. So just to give you an idea, we're going to look at different adaptation strategies. Oxygen, right? Animals live in different environments that differ on how much oxygen, right? At sea level, right, oxygen level is pretty much at its optimum. Or as far as, I mean, we survive really well with that. If you go high altitude, there's less oxygen, right? If you go into salt water and even fresh water, there's very little oxygen. So that's why it's difficult for us to survive up at high altitudes. We have to have assistance. So that's kind of, we can't adapt, right? That's kind of outside our adaptation. Typically, people have to bring oxygen with them. But at sea level, we adapt well. Fish, for example, they adapt to oxygen, again, by specialized gills that enable them to extract oxygen more efficiently. So we'll be talking about different organs involved with lungs, whether it's gills, whether it's skin. Some animals use their skin for regulating oxygen. All right. Finally, we spoke about adaptation, and a large part of this course is going to be involved with animals that keep their same environmental status, they maintain homeostasis by responding to stimulus by counteracting that. For example, saltwater fish, for example, one of the concerns with saltwater fish is that they tend to lose a lot of water by osmosis. And fish that live in the marine environment, they are going to lose water by osmosis. So in response, they pee out very little. In contrast, animals that live in freshwater fish, they're more in danger of taking on too much water. So they tend to excrete a high volume of water. This is what we call regulators, right? They respond to, at least to maintain themselves. So they overcome the challenges. In this particular case, here's a fish that is keeping its blood concentration of chloride the same, even though the water environment changes. It's having to adjust. There are, however, some animals, and we'll talk about a few of them, that kind of go with the flow. If the water temperature changes, their blood temperature changes, or their body temperature changes. This is what we call conformers. Conformers kind of roll with the flow, right, up to a point. All right. So I don't know if I've lost anybody. Oh, we have 62 people here. Okay. So let me take a look at some questions before we end here. I'll try to answer. Oh, a lot of questions. That's what the word alone again. One question was, do we need to use the immediate access version of the textbook? No, you don't. It's there. A lot of my slides are based upon the textbook, the immediate access textbook. If you actually have the real textbook, that's fine, but no, you don't have to. It's just helpful. Someone else asked a question. I have a question and just wanted to make sure if the original midterm is going to be like normal questions and the makeup would be in essay form. Yes, so when you say normal questions, yes. So most of the exam, typical midterm is going to be mostly multiple choice, maybe a couple essay, maybe some true false. Actually, I take that back. The makeup is probably going to be the same, but the questions will be changed. And I'm not sure, that may be confusing on my syllabus. I've got to go back and look at it. But the makeup test will be a different test, but it'll still be the same format. Do we have to take the exam on a specific time? Yes, I am going to give you a window But obviously I understand, again, everyone's at home. Some of you may have kids, some of you may have other jobs you're working and other disruptions. So I am going to give you a window of time when you can take it. The test will be administered through Blackboard, yes. Do we need to open the camera? I don't know what that means. I'm not sure what that means.
I think that means like during Zoom, do we have to have our cameras on?
Oh, no. I mean, well, I mean, no. Most people don't. I mean, it looks like, yeah, if you want to kind of be incognito, no, it's as long as you can hear me and everything like that. No, you don't have to have the camera on. No. With most of the tested topic on your notes, how much of a necessity is a textbook? You know, that's kind of a loaded question. Tony, obviously the material that I'm lecturing on is based from the textbook. Some people do get by just fine with going over my notes, and the exams are going to be based upon the lecture. The textbook is a good resource, you know, to use, and I'll just leave it at that. Like I said, it's not required, but it is useful. Oh, testosterone, yes, testosterone. I have difficulty in downloading this lecture. It's open, but not uploading a few slides. Mina, I'm not sure, were you able to resolve that? Whoever it was. I'm having trouble as well. It could be a browser problem. Well, those people that had difficulty, yeah, I would say it could be a browser problem. That would be my experience. If you're continuing to have problems, let me know. Someone's using Safari. I never use Safari. Yeah, I would use, you can use Chrome, maybe Firefox. I actually use Microsoft Edge. I see Kilani use that. Yeah, Microsoft Edge works. Rita's happy now. Are there going to be extra credit opportunities? Possibly. Jeffrey, possibly extra credit. Would you use a curve for the final grades if needed? Yeah, I'm planning to keep everything at 90, 80, 70. However, typically, past experience, I may curve a little. It's not going to be a major curve. Maybe an A might be 88, B would be 78, but yes, I can curve it. So when we take the exam, we open the camera on Zoom. Okay, thank you. You won't need to take the exam on Zoom. Once the test window is open, we have then an hour or so to take it. You will have typically, yeah, enough time. I'm not sure if it's going to be an hour. It'll be at least an hour. Okay, Mina, you're able to resolve it. Are there assignments out of the book? No graded assignments, but there might be some helpful assignments to refer to, helpful things that might help with the course material. So I think I got through all the questions. Oh, are there assignments? Do we need the 4th edition? I assume that's because someone's got like the 3rd and earlier edition. If you've got an earlier edition, or if you want to get an earlier edition, which are sometimes less expensive, go for it. The newer edition, the 4th, does have better graphics, better images, but as far as the content, physiology is physiology. So if you want to get an earlier edition, that's fine. Are there practice questions on your study guides? God, we had so many questions here. I need to get I need to drink something quick here. It's tea, by the way. Yeah, I probably will. I won't put some, I'm not sure how I'm going to do it. Yeah, I will provide some practice questions. I may do a practice exam on Blackboard. This is going to be something, it's going to be a trial, since at Mesa, we're using Canvas. I've used Blackboard before, not for taking tests, giving tests, but for lecturing and everything. So I'm talking to a couple of my colleagues over at Mesa, like you may know Greg Harris, and going to ask him about that. But I do plan to provide some practice questions. I'll let you know as it gets closer. Oh, how are the essay questions? Is it half, multiple choice, half? I would say it's going to be the majority multiple choice. Every lecture will be recorded and accessible on Blackboard. What I'm going to do is I'm going to record it, upload it to YouTube, and send you guys the link. I'm renting the book from Chegg for $30. If anyone's looking for a physical copy, that's where I went. So if you, I know a lot of people, and I don't blame you. I've ran into this with my class too, is having that copy, that physical copy, it's important, feels good. Yeah, I guess you can get it through Chegg. Oh, it's even less on Amazon. So yeah, whatever works. Trying to think what else. I do have a YouTube page, and I think it's public. So you can actually go onto it. I mean, I'm going to go ahead and send you the link anyway, but I think you could just type in my name, and I think it'll take you there. I've got all sorts of lectures from previous classes, my human physiology class, my human anatomy, if you want to check that out. So, all right. Well, you guys had a lot of questions, which I assumed. It's kind of sucks not being really face-to-face, but thank you for showing up, actually. It looks like we had about 60 people. I think there's 90 people in the class. Oh, one last question. What time will office hours be? So what I'm going to do after we're done here today, I've still got some setting up to do. I will give you more information on when office hours will be. And there was something else I was going to check on. I can't remember what I was going to check on. Let me go back to the beginning. Will there be office hours? Yeah, I mean, I'm going to provide a study guide. So I will put together a study guide in the near future. And there will be office hours sometime this week. The book is recommended, someone said. And if you guys get the immediate access, the digital one, it's pretty cool, actually. It's really nice. I know, like I said, some people like the physical version. This is done purposely, the digital version, because of the situation we're in, going to a bookstore, getting a book, ordering stuff. It just gives you access right away. So I think that takes the stress away from many people. How do I recommend studying for the exam? Well, I think most of you guys are probably seniors, maybe a junior or so. I mean, you've got through this far. Now, granted, it's different being online. I would just suggest repetition, going through the notes and looking at each slide and just looking at what possible questions I could pull out of each slide. You know, that's what I would suggest, just going through the slides and just use the study habits that you've developed up till now. So, all right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop right there because this is my third lecture today and my voice is going to be fading pretty soon. So thanks for showing up. Look forward to a fun semester, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Like I said, this is recorded. I'm going to go ahead and upload it and send you the link. All right, have a great day.